The scent of pine sawdust and linseed oil is the perfume of my life. It's in the creases of my hands, deep as riverbeds on a map of 71 years, and it lingers in the air of my workshop like a ghost of every project I've ever built. This shed isn't just a room, it's a sanctuary. The walls are studded with tools hanging in precise rows, each one an extension of my own gnarled fingers. The old table saw, its blade dulled by decades of use, still sings a true song. The miter box I fashioned from maple 40 years ago fits my hands like a prayer. Out here, with the sun filtering through the dust-speckled window panes, I am not an old man with a crooked back. I am a craftsman. The world outside this shed has changed. But in here, time is measured in the growth rings of the wood I plane and sand. I built the kitchen table where my family gathers, not just assembled it, but shaped it from a rough slab of cherry wood, feeling the grain speak to me as I worked. I carved the crib that rocked my granddaughter to sleep, each curve smoothed with a care that only comes from love. I even raised the walls of the house extension where my daughter and her husband live now, hammering each nail with a hope for their future. This wood holds my history, my sweat, my silent prayers. It's a language I understand, a dialogue between hand and heart that few people ever learn. But lately, a different sound has been intruding on this quiet conversation, the bluster of my son-in-law. I can hear his voice now, echoing from a memory that still smarts like a fresh splinter. He's 38 years old, all swagger and surety, a man who believes the world was invented the day he was born. He's the kind of fellow who confuses noise for knowledge, who thinks a loud opinion is the same as a fact. He calls it DIY spirit. I call it disrespect wrapped in arrogance. I remember the first time he stepped into my workshop about a year after he married my daughter. He didn't look around with the quiet appreciation of someone entering a holy place. No, he strode in like a conquering hero, his eyes scanning my tools with a critic's disdain. "You still using this old thing?" he'd said, tapping the cast-iron base of my bandsaw. "They've got models now with laser guides. You could actually be precise." I just smiled, the way you do when you're biting back a lifetime of experience. My daughter, she sees something in him. A vitality, maybe, a confidence she mistakes for strength. She's always been a gentle soul, my girl, too quick to see the best in people. She thinks his loudness is passion, but I see the insecurity underneath, the frantic need to prove he's the smartest man in any room. He's the type who watches a 5-minute video on the internet and suddenly fancies himself a master craftsman, all theory and no touch. The memory of that first intrusion is a dull ache, but it's the recent event that has sharpened it into a focused point. It happened last month during the family barbecue. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal and grilled meat, the sound of laughter and my grandson's playful shrieks filling the backyard. I was content, sitting in a worn lawn chair, watching the family I'd built my life around. But contentment is a fragile thing, easily shattered. He found me in my workshop, where I'd slipped away for a moment of peace. The door creaked open, and there he was, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light, a bottle of beer in his hand and a smirk on his face. "Hiding out from the party, old man?" he said, his voice too loud for the small space. "I'm just checking on a project. I replied, my voice even. I was oiling the handle of my favorite chisel, a ritual of care. He walked in, his eyes sweeping over my benches. Then he said it. The words that lit the fuse. You know, you really should update your tools. Half of this is junk, a museum piece. The air went still. The gentle hum of the distant party faded away. In that moment, I felt every one of my 71 years, not as a weakness, but as a weight of patience that was finally, exhaustively spent. The rough wood of the chisel handle in my hand felt like an old friend. I looked at him, at his smug, unlined face, and I saw not a man, but a boy playing at being one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The tools around me spoke for me. I set the chisel down carefully and gestured to a piece of oak lying on the bench between us. It was a challenging board, hard as stone, twisted with knots that would defy an inexperienced hand. "All right," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "Show me what you've got. Cut me a perfect dovetail joint. No excuses." His eyes widened for a second, then that familiar arrogance puffed him up like a rooster. A dovetail. Please, that's basic stuff. He grabbed my dozuki saw from its hook. He didn't ask, he took, and he started hacking at the wood. I stood back and watched. For 10 minutes, the only sounds were the ragged rasp of the saw, his increasingly labored breathing, and the soft curse words he muttered under his breath. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He was fighting the wood, forcing it, and the wood was fighting back. When he finally held up his finished attempt, it was a pathetic sight. The pins and tails were uneven, chewed-looking, gaps wide enough to spit through. It looked like something a beaver had gnawed on in a fit of rage. A small crowd had gathered at the workshop door. My daughter, my grandson, a couple of aunts and uncles. They were silent, watching. Without a word, I picked up another piece of the same oak. I took my own saw, its blade sharpened to a whisper's edge. My hands, though crooked, knew this dance. They didn't tremble. They remembered. 3 minutes, that's all it took. 3 minutes of smooth, precise strokes, the saw singing a gentle tune as it bit into the hard wood. When I was done, I held up the 2 pieces. The dovetails were perfect, the angles sharp, the fit exact. I slid them together. They met with a soft, satisfying click, seamless and tight. The room was utterly silent, save for my grandson's awed whisper. "Wow, Grandpa's a wizard." Kyle's face turned a shade of red I'd only seen on a boiled lobster. He tried to laugh it off, to make a joke about the saw being dull, but the words fell flat. No one was listening. The evidence was in our hands. His, a mess of arrogance; mine, a testament to quiet skill. I wiped my hands on my apron, the sawdust falling like snow. I looked him straight in the eye, and I said the words that had been brewing in me for years. Respect is like wood, Kyle. Easy to cut, hard to fix once you ruin it. He hasn't set foot in my workshop since. And now when I speak at the head of that table I built, he listens. Sometimes revenge isn't about shouting or fighting. Sometimes it's about letting skill speak louder than ego. But this story didn't start at that barbecue. It started a long time ago, in the quiet accumulation of years and the slow burn of disrespect. To understand the depth of that lesson, you have to understand the wound that made it necessary. The barbecue was merely the climax. The rising action had been playing out for years, a slow-moving glacier of irritation carving valleys into my patience. It's in the small things, the tiny splinters of disrespect that work their way under your skin over time. You brush them off at first, for the sake of family, for peace. But they accumulate. I remember the first major project he undertook after marrying my daughter. They had just moved into the extension I'd built, and he decided, without consulting me, that the built-in bookshelves in the living room were outdated. He announced he was going to replace them with something sleek and modern. My daughter, ever the diplomat, had asked me to come over and offer advice. I arrived to find him surrounded by flat-pack boxes of particle board and a confusing array of Allen wrenches. The old shelves, which I'd crafted from solid walnut, were already leaning against the wall, destined for the curb. My heart sank a little. That walnut had come from a tree on our old property. I'd milled it myself, dried it for 2 years in my barn, knowing someday it would be perfect for something special. "See," he'd said, gesturing to the instructions on his tablet, "it's all right here, simple." For 3 hours I watched him struggle. The particle board chips split. The cam locks refused to align. He swore, he sweat, he blamed the cheap manufacturing. Finally, in a fit of frustration, he hammered a bracket so hard the drywall behind it cracked. The finished product was wobbly, misaligned, and had a veneer so thin it was already peeling at the corners. I said nothing. I just helped them carry my old walnut shelves to the garage, where they still gathered dust. That was the first time I saw the chasm between his perception and reality. He truly believed that following digital instructions made him the equal of a lifetime of hands-on learning. It was a blindness I couldn't fathom. Then there were the constant gifts. For my birthday last year, he presented me with a cordless, lithium-ion, laser-guided, multi-function power drill. It was sleek, expensive, and to him, the pinnacle of tool technology. He beamed with pride as I opened it. "Now you can get rid of that old corded dinosaur," he said, pointing to my faithful drill press in the corner. I thanked him. I meant it. The gesture was kind. But the drill sits in its box, unused. My dinosaur has drilled true holes for 30 years. I know its weight, its balance, the specific whine of its motor when it's working hard. This new thing is a stranger in my hands, all flash and no soul. He took my reluctance to use it as a sign of stubbornness, of an old man refusing to change. He never understood that it wasn't about the tool. It was about the relationship between the craftsman and his instrument. The tension simmered, manifesting in subtle ways during family gatherings. He'd hold court at my dinner table, explaining the complexities of the stock market or the inner workings of his car's engine, topics he'd just researched online. He'd talk over me, dismiss my anecdotes as old-fashioned stories. I'd catch my daughter's eyes sometimes and see a flicker of embarrassment, but she'd always look away quickly. She loved him, and I loved her, so I swallowed my pride. I sanded down the rough edges of my words, just like I would with a piece of difficult wood. But wood has a memory. It remembers every cut, every gouge, and so do I. The week before the barbecue, the final straw landed. My grandson, a bright-eyed boy of 8, had a school project to build a simple birdhouse. He came to me, his small face full of excitement. "Grandpa, will you help me? I want to make the best one." My heart swelled. This was my territory, a chance to pass something on. We spent an afternoon in the workshop, him standing on a crate beside me, his small hands guiding the wood as I helped him sand it smooth. We talked about the types of birds that might visit, about patience, about measuring twice and cutting once. It was perfect. Then Kyle came to pick him up. He saw the nearly finished birdhouse, a simple but sturdy pine box. Instead of praise, he offered critique. "That's a pretty basic design, champ," he said, pulling out his phone. "Look at this one. It's got a pitched roof and a little porch. We can 3D print some parts to make it really cool." The boy's face fell. The joy of creating something with his hands was suddenly overshadowed by the promise of a flashy, manufactured alternative. I saw it then, clearly. Kyle wasn't just disrespecting me. He was teaching my grandson to disrespect the value of slow, earned skill. He was replacing substance with spectacle. I didn't argue. I just helped my grandson put the final nail in his simple birdhouse. But inside, something solidified. The patience I had been carefully maintaining was now a cold, hard resolve. So when Kyle strutted into my workshop during the barbecue, his condescension was not a surprise. It was an invitation. An invitation I had finally decided to accept. The challenge I issued wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of every slight, every dismissed opinion, every undervalued moment of my life's work. The oak board I pointed to wasn't just a piece of wood. It was my witness. Its knots were like the complications of our relationship. Its hardness a reflection of my own determination. His failure was inevitable. He approached the wood with violence, with the impatient hacking of someone who sees an obstacle to be conquered, not a material to be understood. I approached it with a conversation, a gentle persuasion. My hands, though aged, were steady because they were guided by respect for the tool, for the wood, for the craft itself. The silence after I slid the joint together was more powerful than any applause. It was the sound of truth settling in the room. My grandson's whisper, "Grandpa's a wizard," wasn't just a compliment. It was a validation of everything I stood for. In that moment, I wasn't an old man. I was a master. And Kyle was just a boy who had been loudly, publicly, and undeniably proven wrong. The lesson was delivered, but the story wasn't over. The aftermath held its own quiet revelations. The barbecue ended under a pall of awkwardness that even the setting sun couldn't soften. People left with hurried goodbyes, avoiding Kyle's eye. My daughter gave me a long, complicated look, part gratitude, part worry, part shame. She squeezed my hand before she left, a silent communication that needed no words. I knew she was caught in the middle, and my heart ached for her, even as it felt a grim satisfaction. Kyle disappeared almost immediately, retreating into the house he lived in, an extension I had built with these same hands that had just humbled him. I stayed in my workshop for a long time after everyone had gone, the evening air turning cool. The two dovetail joints sat side by side on the bench, his a monument to haste, mine a sculpture of patience. I picked up his attempt, feeling the rough, torn edges. It wasn't anger I felt anymore, but a profound sadness. This jagged piece of wood was a perfect metaphor for his approach to life. All force, no finesse. I heard the back door of the main house slide open and close. Footsteps approached the workshop, hesitant. I knew it was him before he even reached the door. He didn't come in. He stood on the threshold, a shadow against the deepening twilight. I guess I owe you an apology," he said, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. It was smaller, younger. I didn't turn around. I kept looking at the wood in my hands. "What for?" I asked. "For saying my tools are junk, or for not knowing how to use them?" There was a long silence. I could hear him breathing. "For both," they finally muttered. I was out of line. "It's not about being out of line, Kyle," I said, finally turning to face him. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale in the dim light. "It's about respect. You disrespect these tools because you don't understand them. You disrespect this craft because you've never taken the time to learn it. And you've disrespected me because you think my time is past." He opened his mouth to protest, to offer some weak excuse, but then closed it again. The evidence was literally in my hand. There was no arguing with the chewed-up Dovetail. I said, "Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, through action, through patience. This," I held up his failed joint, "this is what happens when you try to skip the earning part." I saw something flicker in his eyes then. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was a dawning, painful understanding. He was a man who prided himself on being smart, on knowing things. For the first time, he was faced with the undeniable proof of a vast area where he knew nothing at all. It was a humbling of the highest order. He just nodded, a quick, jerky motion, and turned away without another word. The following days were quiet. The usual weekend visits were canceled. My daughter called, her voice tight with tension. She said Kyle had been withdrawn, moody. She asked if I was happy with what I'd done. That question struck deep. Was I happy? No. Happy's too simple a word for the complex stew of emotions I felt. Vindicated, yes. Satisfied that the truth had been shown? Absolutely. But happy? Seeing the strain it put on my daughter? No. Revenge, even the quiet, skillful kind, has collateral damage. But sometimes, the alternative, allowing the disrespect to continue, to be passed on to the next generation, is far worse. A week later, my grandson came over after school. He ran straight to the workshop. "Grandpa, can we build something else?" "Of course we can," I said, my heart lifting. "Dad said I should ask you to teach me," he said, his eyes wide. "He said you're the best." That simple sentence was worth more than any apology. It was a surrender. It was respect, finally, being offered, not because I'd demanded it, but because I'd earned it. The change was gradual but profound. Kyle started asking questions instead of making pronouncements. When they came over for Sunday dinner, he'd linger near the workshop door, looking in with a new, curious expression. He didn't come in, not yet. That space was still too raw for him. But he was observing, learning. One afternoon, I found a small package on my workbench. It was a sharpening stone, a high-quality one. There was no note, but I knew. It was an acknowledgement. He was starting to understand that the value isn't in the tool itself, but in its care, its maintenance, its readiness. It was the first step towards understanding the craft. The final moment of closure just came a few days ago. He appeared at the door of the workshop, holding a broken chair from their kitchen. It was a cheap, store-bought thing. One of the rungs had snapped. "I "Wondered if you could take a look at this," he said, his voice cautious. "I know it's not worth much, but I thought maybe we could fix it together, if you have time." The "we" did not go unnoticed. I looked at him, at the hopeful, uncertain look in his eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a tentative humility. "Pull up a crate," I said, gesturing to the spot beside my bench. "The first thing you need to learn is how to glue a joint properly. Clamps are more important than strength." He sat down, and for the next hour, I taught him. I showed him how to mix the glue, how to apply it evenly, how to position the clamps for maximum pressure without damaging the wood. He listened. He watched. His hands, so clumsy before, were careful, deliberate. We didn't talk much. The conversation was in the work. The scrape of the sandpaper, the squeak of the clamp, the smell of the wood glue. It was a new language we were starting to learn, together. He hasn't called me old man since the barbecue. Now when I speak at the table I built, he listens. Not because he's afraid, but because he's finally learned that some voices carry the weight of experience, a weight that cannot be faked or rushed. The revenge I exacted wasn't about humiliation, though humiliation was a part of it. It was about correction. It was using my skill to carve away the rot of his arrogance, to expose the raw potential wood underneath. It was a lesson taught not with words, but with action. A lesson that respect, like a perfect dovetail joint, requires precision, patience, and a deep understanding of the materials you're working with. And once it's fitted together properly, it holds. It lasts. Sometimes the quietest actions speak the loudest. And the most satisfying revenge is not in destroying someone, but in helping them build themselves into something better. The experience with Kyle left me with more than just a restored sense of dignity. It left me with a lot of time for thought, rocking on the porch swing I'd built for my wife before she passed, watching the seasons change in the oak tree that shades the yard. That tree has seen it all. It was a sapling when I first bought this land, and now its branches are thick and strong, much like the family I've nurtured here. I think about the nature of skill and the illusion of knowledge. In my day, you learned by doing. You apprenticed yourself to a master. You swept the floors, you sharpened the tools, and you watched for years. You learned the grain of different woods, how oak is stubborn and strong, how pine is soft and forgiving, how walnut has a hidden fire in its heart. You learned that a tool is not just a piece of metal, it's a partner. You have to feel it in your hands, understand its balance, listen to the sound it makes when it's working well. It's a relationship built on mutual respect. Kyle's generation, they learn from screens. They have access to all the information in the world, but it's a mile wide and an inch deep. They see a finished product and think the path to it is straightforward. They don't see the countless failed attempts, the splintered wood, the broken blades, the frustration that is an essential part of the journey. They mistake information for understanding. My lesson in the workshop wasn't just about a woodworking joint. It was about demonstrating the chasm between knowing how something is done and actually being able to do it. It was about the silent, muscle-deep intelligence that comes only from repetition and failure. This has made me reflect on my own legacy. What am I leaving behind? The table, the crib, the house, they are tangible things. But the real legacy I see now is the lesson. It's the story my grandson will tell someday about the time his grandfather taught his father a lesson in respect without raising his voice. It's the understanding that true strength isn't loud. It's quiet, confident, and ready when needed. I wonder if Kyle will ever truly love the craft. Maybe not. But he has learned to respect it. And in doing so, he has learned to respect me. Our relationship is different now. It's quieter, more thoughtful. There's a space between us where arrogance used to be, and in that space, something new can grow. Maybe it's a genuine connection. Last weekend, he brought over a blueprint he'd found online for a new patio deck. He said, "I thought we could look at it together. You'd know if it's any good." We spent the afternoon going over the plans, my finger tracing the lines, pointing out potential weak spots, suggesting better materials. He listened. He asked questions. It was the first real conversation we'd ever had about building something. The birdhouse my grandson and I built is still hanging in the oak tree. A family of sparrows has moved in. Every time I see it, I don't just see a simple pine box. I see an afternoon of shared focus with a boy I love. I see the moment his father tried to undermine it, and I see the quiet victory that followed, a victory that ensured that boy would still value the work of his own hands. Revenge is often painted as a fiery, destructive act, but this was different. This was a cold, precise cut, like dovetailing itself. It wasn't about burning something down. It was about joining two disparate pieces together in a way that made them stronger. I had to cut away the rotten parts of his ego to make a clean, strong joint possible. The humiliation was the necessary waste, the sawdust on the floor. What remained was the potential for a stronger bond. So the story ends not with a bang, but with the soft, satisfying click of two pieces of wood fitting together as they were meant to. It ends with the sound of a son-in-law asking, "What do you think?" instead of telling me how it is. It ends with the knowledge that in this family, at this table I built, respect will once again be the foundation. And sometimes that's the best revenge of all. Not to defeat your enemy, but to turn him into an ally. To use your skill not as a weapon, but as a tool for building something better. It's a rainy Tuesday morning as I write this, the steady drumming on the workshop roof, a soothing rhythm. The sharpening stone Kyle gave me is on the bench next to the two dovetail joints I've kept as a reminder. I don't look at them with bitterness anymore. They're just pieces of wood, artifacts of a turning point. The door creaks open. It's Kyle holding two steaming mugs of coffee. He hands one to me. Black, 2 sugars, just how you like it. "Thanks," I say, taking the mug. The warmth seeps into my old hands. He stands there for a moment, looking around the shop, his gaze lingering on the tools hanging in their places. "You know," he says, his voice quiet, "I've been watching some videos, real ones, about sharpening hand saws. It's harder than it looks." I take a sip of the coffee. It's perfect. It is, I agree. It's all in the angle and the patience. He nods. "Maybe," he says it hesitantly. He's still looking around the shop. "Maybe you could show me sometime?" I look at him, really look at him. The arrogance is gone. In its place is a curiosity, a willingness to learn. It's a good look on him. "I could do that," I say. "We'll start next Saturday." A small, genuine smile touches his lips. "Okay, I'll be here." He turns and leaves, closing the door softly behind him. The workshop is quiet again, save for the rain. I pick up the perfect dovetail joint, feeling its seamless fit. The lesson was learned. The respect was earned. And in the quiet of my sanctuary, surrounded by the ghosts of projects past, I know that some things, when built right, truly do last a lifetime. What's the most unexpected plot twist you've ever seen in a family dynamic? Was it a moment of quiet strength, like this one? Or something entirely different? Share your stories of karma and respect found in unexpected places.